So I had a sermon anxiety dream last night. Those are not going away. And it was one of those where I'd forgotten a piece of the necessary items. I'm wearing everything, right? Okay. I think it was because this sermon includes a memory of mine from one of those moments that a minister never wants to have, and that is because I found myself one day preaching to an absolutely empty chapel and a camera, wondering if anybody cared. This happened in seminary when I was doing work training to be a hospital chaplain. It's part of ministerial training. You spend time working in hospitals, and I was doing my work at Mass General Hospital in Boston, and part of the rotation that all the students and chaplains do is to lead services that happen in the chapel. And it looks like any hospital chapel that you would imagine. There are Bibles around and pamphlets on addiction and grief and loss. There are pews and fake stained glass windows, and at least in this chapel, a camera, kind of fixed up like the ones we have here, that feed into the chapel channel for Mass General Hospital. So if you ever go to Mass General, hopefully as a visitor, you can flip through the TV channels in the room, and one of them is a live feed of the chapel. So people sometimes will watch services on Sunday mornings or midweek on Mondays and Wednesdays as part of if they can't get out of their room. We led these services, and it was usually other chaplains and family members and friends of patients who were coming in to see these services. One of the things that you did, there was a big prayer book that you entered. You've seen these in hospital chapels. People go and they write prayers for their friends and loved ones, and you could get the personalities of people and know how long their loved ones have been in the hospital by reading the prayers. And every time we would take the prayer book and set it on the pulpit and read out loud, word for word, these prayers. Didn't matter if anybody was in the room. And on one of these days, it just so happened that all my colleagues were on assignment somewhere in the hospital, and there were no friends and family of anybody there, and it was me and me. And this is that nightmare scenario, because a minister's worst fear is irrelevance. Not being disliked or saying the wrong thing or not being effective, irrelevance. And I imagine that any of you who are in performing arts or public speaking or sales or teaching or I guess almost anybody, the idea that you're playing to an empty house is scary. So I preached my homily and read the prayers word for word and looked up at the camera and wondered if anybody out there cared. And I had an experience this week of being on the other side of that equation. I spent a large part of this past week in the hospital with one of my family members who was in the ICU. And I reached that point that anyone who's cared for someone, especially the ICU, knows that there's a time when you just have to get out of the room and move, get a cup of coffee, get something to eat, breathe fresh air. And so I left the room, and I went down and got a cup of coffee, and all of a sudden I had this urge to go to the chapel at the hospital here in the area. And so I went in. That might seem a normal thing for a minister to do who's visiting a family member, but it's not my normal thing. I actually don't, this is just me, I've kind of been cynical about chapels in hospitals and airports, and so it was odd for me and unexpected to have this desire to go in and sit down. I sat down, I found myself once again alone in a hospital chapel, this time in the pews. I got up and I went over to the prayer book, just like the one that they have, and I wrote a prayer for my family member. I went and flipped through the pages of the Bible that they had opened up, a big one. I grabbed a couple of the pamphlets that they had, and I just sat in the pew. And all of a sudden I had this experience of being tremendously grateful for all of these acts of care that made that moment possible, that were given by people who I will never know. Somebody paid probably a lot of money for that chapel. Their names are probably on a plaque somewhere in that room, but I didn't see it that day. People who work in construction spent many days, weeks, building that room, and I'll never know who they are. They'll never know I used it. Somebody comes in every day and vacuums that floor and changes the light bulbs behind the fake stained glass windows. They refill the little container with pamphlets on addiction and loss. And I sat there knowing that somebody was going to get that book. If they were like any other hospital I'd been to, somebody that I didn't know was going to go take that book and stand up in the pulpit, and whether anyone was in the room or not, they were going to read out loud, word for word, the prayer that I had written for somebody very important to me. I was surprised at how meaningful that moment was. It occurred to me that what was happening was a sacrament. This is for a church that doesn't use that word a lot. The formal, traditional meaning of a sacrament is a visible sign of an invisible grace. We can get behind that. A visible sign of an invisible grace. All of a sudden, the invisible hours and money and time and care that person after person had put into this environment that normally I would just walk right by became visible to me. And in that moment, those unnoticed things became sacraments. All of that sounds a lot like what Marge Piercy was talking about in her poem to me. Of course, she's talking explicitly about playwrights and artists and poets and novelists, the kind of people, and I love it. She says, it's only genius after the book has been published and you've been paid for it. Beforehand, it's a hobby. When there's an audience who claps, you are a playwright, a director, an actor. Beforehand, you're crazy and you need to get a job. She's explicitly talking about artists and poets and novelists, but she's talking about us too. We're growing very used to the idea as a people that we know something has value when there is a certificate or an award or a recognition or profit. That's how I know it made a difference. It sold a lot. Or somebody told me that it mattered and wrote it down and framed it, and I can put it on the wall to prove that to you. But we don't get that luxury in our moral lives. Very few people are professional do-gooders, and even those that are imperfect at doing it. There's just not a system of profit or award that comes that says, guess what? Your life is making a difference. The good that you put into the world is being seen and known, and we get it. That might be nice. Maybe we should start making those plaques. But in our moral lives, I think sometimes it can feel like we are playing to an empty room. Sometimes. As human beings, I know how important it is to us that we feel like we're seen and known on a really deep level, that somebody sees us for who we are and that our life makes a difference and that somebody has been affected by the fact that we moved on this earth. We hear this all the time in the congregation, this sense of powerlessness, this sense of doubt. I mean, this is prevalent. We hear it all the time as ministers and staff, this sense that the problems of the world are simply too big either to solve or to know that we've even come close to making a dent. That's why we formulated theme years around people's calling and service to the world so that we could get tangible evidence that who we are and what we do matters and is known. This sounds simple, but this is probably at the core of much of the anxiety that I hear as a minister in this church. Did you see me? Did it matter that I was here? The people who built Facebook know about this human desire. How do I know if I was seen? Someone liked it. It's this gratifying, addicting thing that the people who designed the software for this program know a lot about human desires and psychology and motivation. People will go back to a screen over and over and over and over again to make sure that somebody liked what I said. They knew about us. Think of the difference between being seen. Think of a little thing like letting a driver get in front of you on the highway. The difference between the person who raises the hand and the person who doesn't. One is a very considerate person who is proving the goodness of the people in my city. The other is a jerk who just goes to show that this place is going to hell. And it's as simple in my mind as that. I saw you. This made a difference. I think any religion worth its salt tries to answer this question. Am I being seen? Do my actions matter? Does anyone notice? And personally, I think that the most literal traditional understandings of heaven and hell are big cosmic explanations for this. Now, this is not what most of our members adhere to, but the idea that the way you believe or the way you live will result in eternal punishment or eternal reward does say you've been noticed. I mean, think about this. The creator of the universe itself knows you, cares about you, thinks that your actions are so important that they merit an eternity's worth of consequence for either way. I don't think we can downplay how important that is to the lives of people that we interact with. The creator of the universe itself knows you, cares about your actions. But we're not a hell church, right? We're not really an afterlife church. Although there's a variety of beliefs about what happens after we die in this room right now, and I know it, we're a church that historically has said, we don't know, but we're sure that whatever it is, it happens to everybody, and it's probably not bad. And so therefore, our focus is right here. And we get that from our Universalist ancestors mostly. I've quoted a million times and will continue to quote Hosea Ballou, one of the most famous Universalists who wrote in 1805, in the relationship between God and human beings, God is not the dissatisfied party. For him, religion was not about people getting into heaven, but getting heaven onto the earth. And so the Universalists made this radical claim that religion was not about being noticed and known by God so that we could get reward or punishment. They actually said it hinders human goodness. They said, if all my job is to make sure that I have saved myself, then I'm not free to be good for others. For them, in their language, they said when they knew that every human being would be reconciled with God, they could relax and focus on this world and this life. Now, this seems less than radical to say from our pulpit, but this was a big deal at the time. In fact, it was such a big deal that in Massachusetts in the 1800s, there were legal arguments brought that would deny Universalists the right to serve on juries or to testify in court. Because a lot of people believed that if you didn't think your actions mattered in the cosmic sense, you couldn't be trusted to make moral decisions here and now. That seems wild, doesn't it? But the people living then, the majority of the population, wanted so badly to believe that our actions made a difference and somebody noticed and there was a consequence, even if we couldn't see it now, that it frightened them to be around people who said, we're all going to end up okay. And that's where we are now. We're in a tradition that says religion is about this life, this world. This is the only life that we know we have, so we had better use it well. And that sounds like a really wonderful thing to say, And I love saying that, and I love repeating it, but it puts a lot of pressure on your life right now. If this is the only one you have, and you feel like no one notices, that is an oppressive experience. If you feel like day after day you work caring for children, or in a job that doesn't provide you reward, or in an industry that you're not sure is doing the right thing, and this is the only chance you have, I can see a lot of anxiety being wrapped up in that. I can also see why it's so gratifying and freeing and fulfilling to have another human being look you in the eye and say, I noticed. What you do makes a difference, and human lives will be better because you exist. We're the kind of religion, I think, that is called to be the voice answering back in the empty chapel. To be the voice calling back to people that people often seek from their family or friends or an MFA on the wall or God. The voice back that says, I see you. What you did made a difference, and you matter. It almost feels superficial and naive as I'm saying this out loud. Like, oh yeah, Aaron, I get it, we matter. Great, talk about something more interesting. But I think that one of the most profound gifts we can ever give another human being is to be evidence that their life matters. To turn ordinary moments into sacraments. To make the unseen seen, the unspoken spoken, the unnoticed noticed. And for me, that begins with noticing what things have been given to us. Like my bunny blanket. Or when we pray for those known and unknown, present and absent, remembered and forgotten. The notion that we would stop and pause and ritualize gratitude. We stop in the dead center of every service and give thanks that we're alive at all. Every time we pause and notice that we're driving on a road we didn't build, or we're drinking water from a well that we didn't dig, or we're sitting in a hospital chapel that we didn't build or don't clean or didn't pay for. If we notice that, it's evidence that a human life makes a difference. Gratitude is tied to us knowing that our own lives matter. I think we prove the value of human effort and care by being explicit with the people in our lives about the effects that their actions have. Being the voice back from the empty chapel, being the card or the phone call or the eye-to-eye conversation that says you're not playing to an empty house. On one of the days at the hospital, I opened the door for somebody on the way out so that I could get a breath of fresh air, and this guy stopped and looked me in the eye and said, "That was a very kind thing to do. It made my hard day better here." This was just opening a door. But that changed how I interacted with every single human being after that. It was different from just saying thank you. He turned it into a sacrament. He said, "Thank you, this has changed me." I hope that one of the things that you get coming here week after week, year after year, I hope that one of the ways that you're changed by being a member here is that you become more sure every single time you encounter this place that your life matters. That your words matter, the ones that heal and the ones that sting. That the love that you give away before you die matters. That the money or time or talent that you give away or keep makes a difference, not in abstract terms, but to real human beings. That you hear from this pulpit time and time and time again that you are a profoundly powerful being who through simple, ordinary acts over the course of a lifetime has the opportunity to provide sacraments to people that you meet. That you're not playing to an empty room. That you change lives just by being present here on a Sunday morning sometimes, even though you don't know it. that you will change the lives of countless people whose names you'll never know. And that's okay. I hope that you know that. And I hope we don't stop telling you that, even when it doesn't seem as profound as we'd like. May it be so, today and all days. Amen.